It was the first day of kindergarten many years ago. I was an adult, but I was there to drop off my son, Charlie. Some kids at that age, they've not spent much time away from mom and dad up to that moment, or they haven't been left in a classroom before filled with a bunch of complete strangers. So it can be rather traumatic for some children. And one boy, sure enough, was weeping and wailing and to his mother with a death grip. And he begged her not to leave him there with all those people he did not know. And the mom looked up at me apologetically and said, Arthur does not deal well with change. And I bent down to Arthur and I said in my best soothing Mr. Rogers voice, "Hey, buddy, look, there's a bunch of cool art stuff over there and nice books over here. And you know, everybody feels this way on the first day of school, more or less." Arthur looked up at me and said, "Shut up!" and went right back to weeping and wailing. So his mom was right. Arthur did not deal well with change. And I thought to myself, well, Arthur, one day when you're all grown up, you realize that change is going to come, like it or not. Many years later, in what should have been an unrelated episode, Ellen and I were on a road trip. And not too far off our path was the small town where I had spent my early growing up years. I had not been back there for decades, and she agreed to join me on a quick side trip down memory lane. It had always felt great to think about that place, the public pool where I took swimming lessons in the summer, my old elementary school, the church I attended, the ballpark where I played Little League, the town square with the courthouse surrounded by quaint shops and restaurants, classic small town Americana. And I was excited to revisit those familiar things again after so many years. In my warm and fuzzy memories, and even in my dreams, images of that town were on a comforting, nostalgic loop. My family had moved away from there before I became a teenager. When we all go through plenty of ages and we begin to explore who we are in the world. So I had grown up and I had been through an awful lot since leaving this small town, and I understood that as we become adults and for the rest of our lives, that life itself does not remain static. It can feel more complex and challenging as we age. I realized that what that little town represented for me was the opposite of all that had transpired since, of all that change. And my long desire to visit there again was to taste a sense, once again, of the simple clarity, the peace of mind, and the stability I remember having as a child. But you can probably see where this is headed. As we drove into town, we were met by a gigantic Walmart parking lot and a string of chain fast food restaurants. I never imagined that those ugly pieces of modern American culture would ever despoil the pristine landscape of my perfect childhood paradise. But that wasn't the end of it. Everything I remembered as being big and majestic had shrunk. The courthouse was still there, but quite a bit smaller. The shops on the square were now selling junky trinkets. The swimming pool and the ball field where I spent so many wonderful, heroic summers was now an industrial park. My old church, which has seemed so tall and elegant and shiny and new when I was a child, it now sat in the middle of an overgrown lot, shabby remnant of its former self. It abandoned. If all that was the march of progress, that was rather depressing. It made me angry. How dare someone change the cute little hometown of all my memories, of all that I held near and dear? So I came to Ellen, but then it hit me. David does not deal well with change. That Little Side Trip was a reality check that change is inevitable and change is not always something I am going to appreciate. It pointed to the truth that what we hold near and dear in our hearts and minds and what we value as stability and as security is a reality that we completely construct inside our heads. It's an ideal that might not always align with the way things really are. Little Arthur throwing a tantrum on the first day of kindergarten, and somewhat grown up David throwing a somewhat milder tantrum because my expectations of a long ago hometown did not meet up with the reality of things. Those are only minor examples of how we handle all the changes that the world constantly throws our way. Sometimes we try to handle that stuff by retreating or escaping from reality, attempting to. I've done that before. It's pretty common. When we're faced with a change that's causing us too much emotional wear and tear or fear, we can deal with it by practicing avoidance. We try to eliminate the thing that's causing us pain by removing it from our field of vision. We know it's still out there somewhere, but we choose not to address it. I saw a video online recently. It was of a man who was being harassed by a bully on a subway train. Now, it's true, it can be really dangerous to intervene in a situation like that, but apparently the subway trip had been going along pleasantly enough, perfectly normal and quiet, until at one stop, a bully boarded the train and he began to verbally harass another passenger, this man, for no apparent reason. A different passenger pulled out their phone to make a video of this event happening, which is the video that I was watching. But everyone else on the train just sat there, staring straight ahead or down at their feet, avoidance, not wanting to take any risks until an older woman, about half the size of the bully and twice his age, went up to him and in no uncertain terms told him to shut up, to leave the man alone and to sit down, which he did. Everyone else on the train cheered and clapped. At least they supported her courage, even if they didn't participate in it. So what happened on that train was that something had changed. The nice, quiet journey the passengers were taking was met with an element of change that was harmful, the bully. But then that harmful change was met and it was overcome by at least one person made a difference, one person who responded in a helpful way. And I watched that video and I thought to myself, what would I have done? Because I'm pretty good at practicing avoidance, staring down at my shoes, of retreating from or escaping reality. When the reality of change just becomes a little too much. Maybe I would have behaved like that brave woman, told the bully to stop. I would like to think so. There are times when we do rise to the challenge of addressing change in a helpful way, even when the outcome of our actions may not be obvious. Even if we do know the likely outcome, we can still summon the courage to challenge things that we know are causing harm. One of the people I often think about when I consider courage is the congressman and civil rights leader John Lewis, who died in 2020. John Lewis was an agent of change. He was willing to sacrifice his own body to protest racial discrimination. One bloody Sunday, March the 7th, 1965, he held a march from Selma to Montgomery to demonstrate for voting rights. The route took the peaceful marchers across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. John Lewis and the marchers knew full well the Alabama state troopers had recently changed their tactics to being more overtly aggressive and violent to civil rights protesters. Because the system of racial bigotry and suppression the state troopers represented, that system did not respond well to change. But in the face of that change in tactics, the demonstrators, John Lewis, marched anyway. And John Lewis was beaten, struck on the head multiple times with a billy club. He almost died. He knew that that could be the likely outcome of facing the change and being an agent of change himself. It was all part of what he called getting into good trouble. But change usually feels like it happens to us, not that we have a hand in causing it, which is a false assumption. Of course, we participate in change and we even lead change. It's inescapable because time does not stand still and we are not just bystanders. And we grow up and we grow older, and in one way or another, every day is the first day of kindergarten, whether we want it to be or not. And every day, we're leafing through a mental and emotional photo album. It might contain images and feelings of a hometown we once knew and loved, but we all have images of people and places we treasure and whose memory brings comfort and peace, even as we try to navigate a world that no longer looks that way. So what do we do with that? Escape it, avoid it, challenge it, shake our fist at it? Since the world's always changing, whether we feel like bystanders or we feel like agents of change, and either of those options can be very stressful, it's important to be reminded of a greater reality, a timeless reality, and that is our inner reality. Our inner reality is how we're feeling, it's how we're coping, and what our attitude is about change. Although, to call it only an inner reality makes it seem kind of small, when in fact, it is the biggest thing in the world. One day, Jesus was with his disciples at the temple complex in Jerusalem. Now, the way Mark describes this story, this happened just a few days before Jesus was arrested and tried and crucified. So at that point, on that day in the temple, Jesus almost certainly knew the outcome of his own habit of getting into good trouble. Jesus tells the disciples to look around at the temple and this whole complex of buildings. It was enormous. It's hard for us to imagine the scale of it. Even today, the platform where that temple was located still exists. It is 37 acres in size. The temple itself stood above that 150 feet, 14 stories into the air, gold trim around polished stone. Looked like it would last forever. And for everyone who came there to worship and make an offering, the temple represented not just the presence of God, but the majestic stability of the promise that God would always be with them. But Jesus says, okay, look around this place. It looks very solid, very permanent, but not one of these stones will remain. All will be thrown down. He was right, by the way. Only 40 years later, the Roman army did tear it down during a war when the Jews rebelled against the Roman occupation. But on that day, later with his disciples, Jesus continues this discussion. The disciples want to know when such an amazing cataclysmic change will happen. How will they know how to anticipate that? How will they know how to handle that? It seems too amazing to even consider. Their world could change that much. So Jesus warns them that one leader or another might indeed come along in the meantime, claiming to know it all and to have all the solutions and to have the ability to chart the future precisely. But he says that is foolishness. Nobody knows that. All we can know for sure is that change is coming. Change is always. Change is now. At our ears today, and probably for the disciples, that can sound a little scary, maybe a lot scary, but I think Jesus was simply pointing out a reality. He knew something we all know if we're only alert to it, that in the midst of any change that challenges us, what matters the most is our connection to the much larger reality, the inner reality. It is a reality that we share with each other. Jesus spoke of it so many times whenever he said, the kingdom of God is within you. The hope, the courage, the joy, the healing, and the peace of God is within you. The love of God is within you already, and it still is today. It's within me and within you and within all of us if we pause long enough to breathe it in and to live into it. That reality flows like a river through any change and carries us along the currents of change, and it gives us the strength and the endurance to even be the agents of change. It gets us into good trouble for the sake of any righteous change. It shares and makes God's kingdom a reality for all people together. That's exactly what we're up to as a church. We're not created or we're not called to ever retreat or return to old ways that never change. No, our task is to engage and to serve and to love our neighbors as we are so loved. And we will be creative and nimble and brave enough to do that, however that looks right now, today, and in the future. Because we are that lady on the subway who stands up and says, "Not on this train." We are the marchers who are crossing that bridge. We are the people who know that the world is changing and that the most powerful force in the universe is the hope and the courage and the joy and the healing and the peace and the love of God that never stands still, that is within us and within everyone we meet, and that only needs to be awakened. And our job and our cause is to embrace that. With that river of love flowing through us, we're going to be dealing well with change. With God's Spirit empowering us, we're here to be the change that the world needs. Just imagine the positive and sacred difference we will make in our relationships, in our community, in our country, and in our world together. Change is always coming. And with God's help, we will make it a change for the better. Amen.